One nation built the most powerful navy the world has ever seen. The other built a navy designed to destroy it. For decades, the United States Navy and the Russian Navy have circled each other across the Atlantic, the Pacific, and the Arctic. They have shadowed each other's submarines, tracked each other's carrier groups, and probed each other's defenses in a continuous, silent confrontation that never fully ended with the Cold War. Today, in 2026, that confrontation is more intense than it has been in 30 years. Russia's invasion of Ukraine changed the strategic landscape of Europe and brought NATO naval forces to a higher state of readiness than at any point since the Soviet collapse. American and Russian warships operate in close proximity in the Baltic, the Black Sea, and the North Atlantic, with a regularity that keeps naval commanders on edge. So the question that defined an entire era of modern history is back on the table. If the United States Navy and the Russian Navy went to war, who would win? The answer is more complicated than most people expect. Russia is not the Soviet Union, but Russia is also not weak. And in certain specific domains, Russian naval technology represents some of the most dangerous weapons ever put to sea. Let us go through everything. Fleet size, submarines, surface ships, missiles, nuclear weapons, geography, and the factors that would actually determine the outcome of a real conflict between these two naval powers. To understand where both navies stand today, you need to understand where they came from. The United States Navy emerged from World War II as the undisputed master of the seas. It had more carriers, more battleships, more submarines, and more combat experience than any other navy in history. The decades that followed only deepened that dominance. American naval technology raced ahead. Carrier aviation became the defining form of naval power projection. Nuclear submarines gave the Navy a global, invisible strike capability. The Aegis combat system created air defense networks that could protect entire fleets from air attack. The Soviet Navy took a different approach. Soviet naval strategists knew they could not match American carriers in open ocean warfare. So they built a navy designed to deny the Americans freedom of movement rather than defeat them in traditional fleet battles. Massive submarine forces, long-range anti-ship missiles, mine warfare. The Soviet Navy was an asymmetric force built around one core mission. If war comes, prevent American carrier groups from reaching Soviet shores and sink as many Western ships as possible in the process. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the Russian Navy went into freefall. Ships rusted at dock, crews went unpaid, maintenance stopped. The submarine force, once the most feared in the world, shrank dramatically as boats were decommissioned faster than Russia could afford to replace them. The catastrophic sinking of the submarine Kursk in 2000, with the loss of all 118 crew members, exposed just how far Russian naval capability had deteriorated. Then Vladimir Putin began the process of rebuilding. Not to Soviet levels, and not with Soviet methods, but with a focused investment in specific high-value capabilities. Russia decided it did not need a navy that could match America ship for ship. It needed a navy that could threaten America with consequences too severe to ignore. That strategy produced some of the most dangerous weapon systems afloat today. Let us start with the numbers, because the contrast is stark. The United States Navy operates approximately 290 Naval Force ships. This includes 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers, 92 guided missile destroyers and cruisers, 53 attack submarines, 14 ballistic missile submarines, and a large fleet of amphibious assault ships, supply vessels, and supporting craft. Behind these ships stands the largest naval industrial base in the democratic world, dozens of overseas bases, and a budget that dwarfs every other navy on Earth. Russia operates approximately 340 ships of various types when you count all vessels, including smaller coastal craft and support ships. In terms of major combat vessels, the number is significantly smaller. Russia has one aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov, which has spent more time in the shipyard for repairs than at sea and has suffered a series of embarrassing mechanical failures and accidents. Russia has roughly 15 to 20 major surface combatants that are considered fully operational and capable of blue water operations. And Russia has approximately 60 submarines of various types, with around 30 considered fully operational at any given time. On paper, the numbers favor the United States overwhelmingly. But as we will see, raw numbers only tell part of the story when it comes to Russian naval power. Submarines are where Russia remains genuinely dangerous, and where any honest analysis has to give Russia significant credit. The Soviet Union built submarine warfare into an art form, and Russia has preserved more of that legacy than almost any other part of its military. Russian submarine doctrine, tactics, and crew training reflect decades of accumulated expertise in underwater warfare that no other nation except the United States can match. Russia operates several classes of nuclear-powered attack submarines that are considered highly capable. The Yasen class, of which several are now in service, with more under construction, is a genuinely modern submarine equipped with advanced sensors, a large vertical launch system for cruise missiles, and acoustic signatures that Western analysts describe as significantly quieter than older Russian boats. The Yasen is the submarine that NATO submarine hunters worry about most. Russia also operates the Oscar-class cruise missile submarines, massive boats designed specifically to hunt and destroy American carrier strike groups. An Oscar-class submarine carries 24 P-800 Onyx anti-ship cruise missiles, each one capable of flying at supersonic speeds and carrying a warhead large enough to mission-kill a destroyer or severely damage a carrier. A single Oscar-class submarine represents an existential threat to any surface group that cannot locate and destroy it first. At the strategic level, Russia operates the Borei-class ballistic missile submarine, carrying the Bulava intercontinental ballistic missile. These are Russia's sea-based nuclear deterrent, and they are the submarines that keep American strategic planners awake at night. A Borei-class boat on patrol represents an assured second strike capability that means any nuclear conflict with Russia would result in catastrophic retaliation, regardless of what happens to Russian land-based missiles. American submarine forces remain superior overall in terms of quieting technology, sensors, and tactical proficiency. But Russian submarines are not the rusting relics that some analysts portrayed them as in the 1990s. They have improved substantially. They operate in waters where they have significant home field advantages, and their weapons are genuinely threatening to American surface forces. Now let us talk about the weapon that has most dramatically changed the Russia-NATO naval balance: hypersonic missiles. Russia has invested more heavily in hypersonic missile development than any other nation, and it has fielded operational hypersonic weapons before the United States or China. The Zircon hypersonic cruise missile, now being deployed on Russian surface ships and submarines, travels at speeds of approximately Mach 9, meaning it covers a kilometer in roughly a tenth of a second. At those speeds, current naval defense systems have extremely limited time to detect, track, and intercept incoming threats. The Zircon can be launched from surface ships, including the Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates, and from submarines. Its range is reported at over 1,000 kilometers. This gives Russian warships and submarines the ability to threaten American and NATO surface forces from distances well beyond the effective range of most defensive systems. Alongside the Zircon sits the Kinzhal hypersonic ballistic missile, air-launched from Russian aircraft and capable of striking naval targets at range, and the older but still lethal P-800 Onyx and Kaliber cruise missiles, which Russia has used extensively in its conflict in Ukraine, demonstrating that these are not just paper weapons, but systems that have been tested in actual combat conditions. This is the core of Russian naval strategy in 2026. You do not need a large fleet if your missiles can threaten to sink anything that comes within range. Russia has essentially built a keep-out zone around its coastlines and the seas adjacent to its territory that any opposing naval force would enter at significant risk. The United States is developing its own hypersonic weapons and investing in next-generation interceptors designed to defeat hypersonic threats. But as of today, Closing this gap remains a priority that has not yet been fully achieved. Surface ships tell a story of Russian decline and selective modernization. The Russian surface fleet has shrunk dramatically from Soviet levels. Russia no longer operates battlecruisers in any meaningful numbers. Its one remaining Kirov-class battlecruiser, the Pyotr Veliky, is one of the largest surface combatants in the world, but it has spent extended periods undergoing repairs and its operational status is uncertain. The aircraft carrier Admiral Kuznetsov, Russia's only flat-top, has been a symbol of Russian naval struggles. Its ski-jump launch system limits the aircraft it can operate. It lacks catapults, limiting sortie rates, and the types of aircraft it can use. It has suffered fires, accidents, and mechanical failures. In any realistic conflict scenario, the Kuznetsov would be a liability rather than an asset. What Russia has done is invest in smaller, cheaper warships armed with long-range missiles. The Gorshkov-class frigate and Buyan M-class corvette are small ships by comparison to American destroyers, but both can carry caliber cruise missiles capable of striking targets over 1,500 kilometers away. Russia demonstrated this capability dramatically in 2015 and repeatedly thereafter when it launched Kalibr missiles from small Caspian Sea corvettes against targets in Syria. The message was clear. Russia does not need large ships to threaten targets at long range. This approach means that Russian surface power is concentrated not in large blue water warships, but in a distributed network of missile-armed vessels, submarines, and land-based missile systems that together can threaten opposing forces across wide areas of sea. Geography gives Russia enormous advantages in specific theaters, and this is crucial to any honest assessment. The Arctic Ocean is Russia's backyard. Russian submarines routinely operate in Arctic waters where the ice, the acoustics, and the extreme conditions make tracking them enormously difficult. Russia has invested heavily in Arctic basing, with facilities across its northern coast that support submarine operations. In the Arctic, Russia operates on familiar terrain against forces that are largely operating in unfamiliar and challenging conditions. The Baltic Sea is essentially a Russian lake in terms of missile range. Russian Iskander missile systems, based in Kaliningrad, the Russian exclave on the Baltic coast, can reach every major port in the Baltic region. Any NATO naval force operating in the Baltic would be within range of land-based Russian weapons from the moment it entered those waters. The Black Sea was traditionally a contested waterway where Russian naval power was significant. Russia's Black Sea Fleet, based at Sevastopol in occupied Crimea, was a major regional force. However, the war in Ukraine fundamentally changed this picture. Ukrainian forces, using Western-supplied missiles and domestically developed naval drones, managed to sink or severely damage a significant number of Russian Black Sea Fleet vessels, including the flagship Moskva cruiser. Russia was forced to relocate much of its Black Sea Fleet from Sevastopol to ports further east. This represents a genuine and significant degradation of Russian naval capability in that theater. In the open Atlantic, the balance shifts dramatically in favor of the United States. American carrier strike groups, backed by NATO allies with substantial naval forces, would hold decisive advantages in deep water far from Russian shores. The Royal Navy, the French Navy, and other NATO naval forces add significant combat power to any American-led coalition. The war in Ukraine has provided an unprecedented real-world test of Russian military capability, and the results for the Russian Navy have been troubling. The sinking of the Moskva in April 2022 was the most significant loss of a major warship in combat since the Falklands War 40 years earlier. The Moskva was the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, a Slava-class cruiser armed with anti-ship missiles and air defense systems. It was sunk by 2 Ukrainian Neptune anti-ship missiles. For a fleet flagship to be destroyed by a nation that had no navy to speak of at the start of the conflict was a profound embarrassment and a serious tactical blow. Since then, Russian naval vessels operating in the Black Sea have been struck repeatedly by Ukrainian naval drones. small unmanned surface vehicles packed with explosives that have successfully attacked Russian ships in harbor and at sea. These attacks have forced Russia to severely curtail Black Sea Fleet operations and demonstrated significant vulnerabilities in Russian naval defense against low-cost asymmetric weapons. These combat losses matter for our comparison because they reveal real gaps in Russian naval capability. Anti-drone defenses, fleet air defense, damage control, and situational awareness have all shown weaknesses under actual combat conditions. A Navy that struggles against a relatively low-technology opponent would face even more severe challenges against the full combat power of the United States Navy. Let us talk about what a real U.S.-Russia naval conflict would actually look like. The most likely scenario would not be a grand fleet engagement in the middle of the Atlantic. It would more likely begin as an escalation of existing tensions, perhaps in the Arctic, the Baltic, or following a confrontation between Russian and NATO forces in or near Ukraine. In the early hours, both sides would attempt to establish situational awareness. American P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft would begin hunting Russian submarines. American attack submarines already positioned in the Atlantic would move toward their assigned patrol areas. Satellite surveillance would track Russian surface ships leaving port. Russian submarines would be the primary threat to American surface forces. Oscar-class boats armed with anti-ship cruise missiles would attempt to close within firing range of American carrier groups. The underwater battle between American and Russian submarines would be intense, invisible, and potentially decisive. Whichever side can sink the other's submarines while protecting its own would gain an enormous advantage. On the surface, Russian hypersonic missiles would represent a serious threat to any American ships that came within range. American carrier groups would likely maintain standoff distances that complicate Russian targeting while launching their own strikes at long range. F-35C aircraft operating from carriers would attempt to suppress Russian air defenses. Tomahawk cruise missiles would target Russian naval bases, missile batteries, and command facilities. The Arctic theater would be particularly dangerous and unpredictable. Both sides have invested in Arctic capability, but the operational environment there is unlike any other in the world. A conflict at sea between the United States and Russia would also carry the shadow of nuclear escalation. Both nations possess enormous nuclear arsenals. Both have sea-based nuclear weapons. The risk that a conventional naval conflict could escalate to nuclear exchange is a factor that would influence decision-making at every level, from the ship's captain to the head of state. So who wins? In a sustained conventional naval conflict across all theaters, the United States Navy and its NATO allies would hold decisive advantages. Superior numbers of capable surface combatants, the world's best carrier aviation, a larger and generally more capable submarine force, better logistics, and the combined naval power of the entire NATO alliance would be overwhelming advantages over time. But in specific theaters and specific scenarios, Russia could inflict serious damage. Arctic operations would be costly for American forces. Russian hypersonic missiles represent genuine threats that current defenses cannot reliably counter. Russian submarines operating in home waters would be difficult to find and destroy. Any American commander who assumed that a conflict with Russia would be quick and clean would be making a dangerous mistake. The losses on both sides in a major naval conflict would be significant. American ships would be sunk. American sailors would die. The idea that the United States could simply sweep Russian naval forces aside without taking serious casualties does not reflect the actual threat that Russian weapons represent. The deeper truth is that a naval war between the United States and Russia would carry risks that dwarf any conceivable strategic benefit. Both nations know this. The nuclear dimension alone ensures that any conflict between them would be managed with extreme caution by both sides. What we are likely to see instead is what we have already been seeing for decades. Close approaches, intelligence gathering, probing of defenses, occasional dangerous incidents that are managed and de-escalated, a continuous competition just below the threshold of open conflict. Russia's Navy is not the Soviet Navy. It cannot challenge American global naval dominance, but it is not a broken force either. It has dangerous weapons, capable submarines, and a willingness to use naval power as a tool of geopolitical pressure. In the waters closest to Russia, it remains a force that demands respect and careful handling. The United States Navy remains supreme, but supremacy in war is never free, and any conflict with Russia would remind the world of that truth in the most painful way possible. Thank you for watching Naval Force. Subscribe for weekly coverage of the world's most powerful navies, warships, and military operations.